Our next readings from the Lord's Word are from the book of the teachings of the New Church called Apocalypse Revealed, part of the section that explains the internal meaning of our reading from the book of Revelation. And it says, "I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven. This symbolizes the Lord in his divine majesty and power. And he cried with a loud voice as when a lion roars. This symbolizes a grievous lamentation that the church was taken from him. A lamentation over this is what the angel's roaring like a lion symbolizes, for a lion roars when it sees its enemies and is attacked by them, and when it sees its young or its prey carried off. The same is comparatively the case with the Lord when he sees his church carried off by devils." And then our final reading is from the book Married Love, part of the chapter on Zeal. Viewed in itself, zeal is, so to speak, the fire of love set ablaze. Zeal is the fire of love set ablaze because zeal is an expression of love, and love is spiritual warmth, which in its origin is a kind of fire. As regards the first point, that zeal is an expression of love, this people know. When they speak of being zealous and acting from zeal, they mean nothing else than an intensity of love. But because it does not appear as love when it manifests itself, but as antagonistic and hostile, being militant and combative against the one who does injury to the love, therefore it may also be called the defender and protector of love. For it is the nature of all love to erupt into indignation and anger, even into rage, when it's dislodged from its delights. So it is that if love is interfered with, especially if it's a governing one, there results a disturbance of the mind. And if that interference does injury, it becomes a white-hot fury. It can be seen from this that zeal is not the highest degree of love, but that it is love set ablaze. Amen. So in our reading from the book of Revelation, the Lord cries out with a loud voice, like a lion's roar, because his church was taken from him. And that's an image of the Lord that we don't see that often, at least not in the New Testament. The Gospels present such a wonderful picture of the Lord's patient wisdom that sometimes we don't notice or don't pause to see how powerful his affections are. The reading from Apocalypse Revealed said that cry, like a lion's roar, was a grievous lamentation. So the emotion being expressed is grief, but not quiet grief. The idea of a lion's roar is supercharged with impressions of strength. And for the Lord to give voice to his strength because of what's happening to his church is, yes, an expression of grief, but it's also an expression of zeal. And zeal, as it said in that final reading, is the word for love that is rising up to defend. It's the fire of love set ablaze. On the one hand, it makes total sense that the Lord could be filled with zeal. If you love something, you get fiery when that something is attacked, and the Lord loves a lot of things. His zeal is something that we see in the Word. When he made a whip of cords and drove the money changers out of the temple, we're told that the disciples watching him remembered the psalm where it's written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." And then in a famous prophecy of the Lord's birth, we're told, "Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this." The Lord's zeal shows up over and over in the Word, and in a way that just makes sense. But on the other hand, it can be difficult to picture the Lord showing this kind of fierceness, this lion-like zeal, especially because we might think of this as something that we ourselves are not allowed to do. The Lord drove the money changers out of the temple with a whip. And that kind of intensity and that degree of confrontation are things that many of us shrink away from, things that we might even think of as wrong. And yet, here is God acting this way. And it needs to be said that he doesn't act this way all the time. That gentle, patient wisdom that I mentioned before really is the aspect of the Lord that shines out most clearly in the Gospels. He isn't blazing with zeal all the time, and nobody should be. But being zealous when the moment calls for it is something that God himself sets a precedent for. Being zealous when the moment calls for it is a good thing. The essential idea underlying all this talk of zeal is that zeal is simply an aspect of love. We sometimes think of love as a warm, happy feeling, but love isn't a feeling. Love is a desire for something and an impulse in our spirits towards something. So, selfish love is a bending of our spirits towards ourselves and a desire for our own happiness, whereas unselfish love is a bending of our spirits towards someone else and a desire for their happiness. When love gets what it wants, we feel happy. When love doesn't get what it wants, we feel sad. And when the thing we love is attacked, we feel zeal. And we all know how hot that zeal can blaze. The passage that I read from Married Love goes on to say that love is the very being of a person's life. Consequently, anyone who attacks another's love attacks that person's very life. Our zeal reaction can be as intense as the reaction that we would have if somebody came to try and take our physical life away from us. It can be hard to know what to do with that intensity. And we might not even believe that we're allowed to feel that way. The thing to understand is that zeal is just an expression of love. And some love is selfish, and some love is unselfish. These two kinds of love are often simultaneously active within us, and it can be hard to tell them apart. The zeal of a good love and the zeal of an evil love both look the same on the outside. They look like anger. They look like someone flaring up and getting mad, but they're really different on the inside. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to be calling the zeal of a good love zeal, and the zeal of an evil love anger. And the idea is that zeal is at heart a good thing, whereas anger is at heart an evil thing. And learning how to understand and manage these two things, zeal and anger, is really useful? To oversimplify it a little bit, there are two ways that we can go wrong with zeal. Either too much zeal or too little zeal. Too little zeal means being unwilling or afraid to stand for the things that we believe are important. And in practice, what this often looks like is being too polite to speak up on behalf of what we love. Or it might look like being afraid of people's reactions, afraid of starting a fight, and therefore backing away a little bit from whatever it is that we claim to love. Obviously, courtesy is a good thing, and a reluctance to start fights is a good thing. Zeal is not something we're supposed to be strewing around us wherever we go. There's definitely such a thing as too much zeal. We're not here on earth to win arguments, and we're not here to do battle. But we are here to choose what we love. And if we choose something and claim to love it, and yet we back away from it every time things might get intense, every time we run the risk of losing face, well, then we're not making that love our own. We're not committing to anything except saving face. Loving something means being willing to fight for it if that's what we have to do. There's definitely such a thing as too little zeal. But for many of us, too much zeal is the more common problem. Or to put it more accurately, zeal that isn't actually zeal, but is in fact anger, is the more common problem. And part of what makes this problem such a problem is that, as I said, good loves and not so good loves are often active within us at the same time. So to take a relatively easy example, imagine that someone has insulted someone you love. Imagine they've said something totally out of line to your husband or wife or father or mother. It's probably pretty easy to picture the hot feeling that would rise up in that situation. And odds are that part of that feeling would be pure. Part of that feeling would be a yearning to protect the person that you love. And odds are that another part of that feeling would be a desire to retaliate and to crush the offending party. So in that situation, zeal and anger would be flaring up together, and the zeal would be justified. Of course, we should protect the people that we love. But isn't it all too easy to picture yourself getting too heated, to picture yourself making the situation worse by mixing your own anger into it? The teachings of the new church give us some really powerful tools for distinguishing zeal from anger. That final reading from Married Love is part of a whole chapter on zeal. And further on in that chapter, we're shown two fundamental differences between the way that zeal behaves and the way that anger behaves. So we read, first, the zeal of a good love is like a heavenly flame, which never leaps out to attack another, but only defends itself, defending itself against an evil assailant in much the same way as when such a one rushes at a fire and is burned. Whereas the zeal of an evil love is like a hellish flame, which spontaneously leaps out and rushes upon another and tries to devour him. Second, The zeal of a good love immediately dies down and softens when the other desists from the attack, whereas the zeal of an evil love persists and is not extinguished. So, first of all, anger attacks, but zeal does not. Zeal only defends. And secondly, zeal calms down as soon as the threat is gone, but anger lingers and festers. If we're able to do just a little bit of honest self-reflection, these two distinctions can make it really clear to us whether it's anger or zeal that's driving us. Are we inclined to lash out, to strike out, to bring the fight to the enemy? The desire to attack is a fundamentally evil thing. Zeal is willing to fight, but there's a kind of reluctance inherent in zeal. Good loves go into battle only when they truly need to. And a good love doesn't enjoy conflict. And then when the conflict ends, that's a really powerful moment for some quick introspection. So when that person who's insulted your loved one apologizes and backs down, is there a part of you that's dissatisfied? Part of you that wanted to keep on giving it to them? Pure zeal really does fade like smoke before a wind when the thing that we love is no longer under threat. Another thing that we're taught is that true zeal has charity within it, which means that someone acting from zeal wills well towards the people that they're fighting, no matter how bitter the fight gets. And then that goodwill comes to the surface again as soon as the fight is over. And that's a hard state to reach, but it's something to bear in mind, something to work on whenever we recognize that our love is starting to catch fire. We can make a conscious choice to will well towards other people even when we come into conflict with them. Within all zeal, there is something that doesn't fight, something that never fights because it doesn't have to. The reading from Married Love said that zeal is not the highest degree of love. It's just love set ablaze. In its highest degree, love is at peace. Or at least, real heavenly love is at peace, because all real love is from the Lord, who is peace itself. And that means that the more that heaven is present within our love, then the more we'll be at peace within ourselves, no matter what conflict takes place around us. And true zeal has that peace somewhere deep within it. Listen to this teaching from the heavenly doctrines. To outward appearances, spiritual and heavenly zeal looks like anger, but inwardly it is neither anger nor even indignation expressing anger, but a kind of sorrow, coupled with the wish that something should not be. And more inwardly still, a kind of vague displeasure that interrupts heavenly delight, because what is good and what is true does not exist in another. What this passage is saying is that wise zeal may look like anger on the very surface, but as soon as you go below the surface, it's just sorrow. sorrow that the conflict even has to take place. And the wiser and deeper our zeal becomes, the vaguer and softer is that sorrow. And that's because deep, wise love brings us very near to the Lord Himself. And the Lord is peace. The Lord is so powerful that no evil and no conflict can ever come close to Him. In the heavenly doctrines we're taught, internal good that comes from the Lord never fights, no matter how it is assailed, because it is mild and gentle, patient and yielding, for its character is that of love and mercy. Yet, although it does not fight, it conquers all. Nor does it ever think about combat or about glory on account of victory. And this is because it is divine and is safe of itself. The wiser our love becomes, and the more we receive that good that comes from the Lord, the more we understand that we are safe. And when we know we're safe, our zeal doesn't need to be a certain kind of intense. When we know that we're with the Lord, there doesn't need to be anxiety within our zeal anymore. And as for the Lord Himself, yes, the Lord is zealous. He loves His people and His church deeply and ardently, and He is willing to fight for us. When He was born on earth, He gave His life for us. But the Lord also knows His own strength, and He knows that we are safe with Him, and He loves to have us close to Him. And compared to that joy and that peace, His zeal is a fleeting thing. And that's what He means when He says to us in the book of Isaiah, "With a little wrath I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting mercy I will have compassion on you. For the mountains shall depart and the hills shall be removed, but my mercy shall not depart from you, nor shall my covenant of peace be removed." Amen.